Growing My Grandpa is the newest game released from the developer Yames. Seeing as I had already covered Yames before, I intended to wait a long time before revisiting his work, but Growing My Grandpa impressed me so much that I felt I needed to cover it. Now you may be wondering how I was able to get this video out so quickly. No, this isn't a paid advertisement or anything of the like. I'm just a supporter of Yames on his Patreon. This allows Patreons to receive a copy of his new games 1 to 2 weeks early. If you have the money and you enjoy his games, I would recommend subscribing to him, not just for the bonus perk of getting an early copy, but also for supporting a smaller developer and allowing them to continue making some amazing stuff. Link is in the description. Growing My Grandpa is told from the perspective of a school guidance counselor. You are trying to help a student named Adrian who has been withdrawn during classes. She has just moved into her late grandpa's house, so with this new change in environment and the general cold attitude shared by both her parents, we can put down a reason for Adrian's not so great behavior. Our job is to try and get Adrian to open up, have her talk about her home life so we can assess her situation further. While she is closed off about most topics, she does brighten up when mentioning the house's basement. But then she begins to tell us about strange things in said basement. A creature covered in brush hair. A book on Eurasian magic. A weird doll. A warning telling us not to trust William, and a secret room with a prison cell. After reading the book on magic, Adrian places a picture of a grandpa on this doll, but nothing happens. The school counselor chalks this all up to fantasy, a way that Adrian is able to cope with all of her family turmoil. Cut to a week later, in the second session, and Adrian is showing improvement in her classroom behavior. She closes up quickly when asked about her home life again, but she won't stop talking about the basement, as she tells us she has begun to grow her grandpa. From here on out, we spend our time playing as Adrian. We have to take care of our grandpa, complete chores around the basement, and for the player specifically, you got to try and figure out exactly what's really going on. In order to grow a healthy grandpa, we need to do a few things. First off, we need to feed him. You need to try to find anything edible. It doesn't matter if it's rotting, our grandpa can still find some sort of nutrients from it. But completely inedible objects like batteries or soap are still off the table. You're gonna have to find some other way to feed him those. Your grandpa is also starting life again from an almost infant state, and while he is growing at an incredible pace, some academic and muscle stimulation could do the trick. Use vocab cards to work out those new linguistic muscles and to jumpstart his brain. Adrian is a child as well, so some of these cards may bring up some questions that you can ask your grandpa. After a satisfying day of eating and learning, you can ask grandpa to come close and have a conversation. He may be a little underdeveloped now, but give it some time and he will start to make a little more sense. Now, of course, you may be asking, how do we find food in vocab cards? Well, viewer, it's really quite simple. We dig it out of the trash. A lot of your time is going to be spent slowly uncovering items from trash piles. There are a few items hidden in plain sight, so do keep a lookout for them, but they are the exception and not the rule. Now, picking up trash may not seem like the most thrilling form of gameplay. And it's not. But it is optimized and, it allows you to move this trash bin around. This part of the game, while not my favorite, does have a couple of good moments. And picking up trash does give you a little hit of dopamine every time you do find something in those piles. The rest of the game is spent reading documents and solving puzzles around the basement. Like, where can I find a sharp object to open up these pulsing growths that have been spreading around the basement? I wouldn't say the puzzles in this game are all that difficult to solve, because once you sort of figure out the first major piece, they all kind of just fall into place. Still, if you're like me, it may take you a bit to figure out what you need to do to get that ball first rolling, which gives you plenty of time to stew in the game's amazing atmosphere. The basement consists of 2 rooms, the main entrance at the bottom of the stairs and the holding cell past the door. What I think is interesting is the way the game's soundtrack shapes these rooms in a contradicting manner. For example, the holding cell containing Grandpa has the more comforting tracks in the game. These songs are comparable to tracks you would hear in something like Silent Hill series. While these songs are not threatening, it hints at both the sinister and sick nature that Adrian's new grandpa gives off. Contrast this with the tracks that can be found in the room without the creature in it. These tracks have a lot of range. Loud droning makes you want to end the garbage search early. Or even this track, which at times plays the sound of footsteps, just to keep you on edge. It's meant to be uncomfortable, despite basic reasoning dictating this should be the safer of the 2 rooms. Now, the audio is mixed this way because we aren't really seeing the world through our eyes, we're seeing it through Adrian's, and from the very beginning she hasn't exactly been a trustworthy guide to the player. A normal human would have ran away from the creature at the beginning of the game, but not Adrian. She instead glued a picture of her grandpa to a doll and shoved it into a holding cell. Now, I have sympathy for her. She's just a child and one that's clearly dealing with issues and trauma. But because we, the player, aren't dictating where the story is going, we just have to watch while she takes care of a clearly dangerous entity. It's like watching a train wreck happen in slow motion. The player is unable to make any meaningful decisions like, I don't know, show the parents the weird thing that's growing in the basement. So instead, we just have to help her raise it in order to progress the story. I've been tiptoeing around the documents that you can find around the basement. These are documents left behind by Adrian's grandpa, Dr. Hart, and his associates, and they tell a harrowing story of what is really happening with this new grandpa. These documents are where the real meat of the story lies, and whether it's due to Adrian's inability to comprehend what she's reading, or if she's willfully playing ignorant to the warnings found all over the pages, is what makes this train wreck situation for the player all the more sickening. I'm going to put up a spoiler warning here because the rest of this video will cover the rest of the story and its 2 endings. If you like Yames or like what you've seen so far, then give it a shot before watching the rest of the video. Link is in the description. The creature up to this point that we have known as Grandpa was named Whiskers by the scientists. The reasoning being the rough whisker-like appendages that help it form its new bodies. Whiskers was discovered in what we can assume was a rural Eastern European village and was being kept by an aging man who, on first arrival, forced everyone to wear masks to conceal their identities. Whiskers was observed crawling out of a burning pot in this village, and he could take nutrients from even rotten food. Dr. Hart would get possession of the creature and with a team of university students began experimenting on it. This was in order to understand how big of a threat it could be. It not only can mimic humans, but it was found to target them as well, and even through complete full destruction would still find a way to regrow itself from a nucleus. Many tests were conducted to see if it was truly indestructible, and to see if it would retain any of its memories from its previous forms. It was discovered that even if names and faces weren't being directly shown to Whiskers, it still had the ability to mimic family members of anyone interacting with him. They concluded that it had the ability to psychically read the minds of those around it. So if it was allowed to grow, it could eventually copy the loved ones of someone nearby. Through many test runs, they agreed that Whiskers should be destroyed and contained no longer than 4 weeks of development, since afterwards it could attack and mimic those around it, looking identical to its victim. They called this event a mimic scenario. Dr. Hart and his team could do little to scientifically explain its incredible regenerative abilities, and to their horror, it did appear that it was developing faster and faster every generation. With not much left to lose, Dr. Hart began flirting with the idea that Whiskers may be the product of witchcraft and might be controllable. This was, of course, until a mimic scenario happened, resulting in the death of one of his researchers, William. William was trying to have Whiskers mimic his deceased sister, but for whatever reasons, Whiskers crawled into and began controlling and eating William. In a panic, Dr. Hart locked up the basement and house. He began to drive and track down all the rest of his colleagues to collect their keys as to remain the house on lockdown. But on the same day of trying to find his colleagues, he died in a fatal car accident. The chilling part about these documents is that most of them can be found on week 2, the first time the player is given full control of Adrian. All the warning signs of potential dangers are right there, and if the player does not properly explore the relationship of Adrian and her new grandpa, a mimic scenario will happen again. This event only occurs when you don't make the connection that yes, Whiskers is a demon of some kind and requires a blood sacrifice and a placeholder for what you truly wish for. In the case of Adrian, she wanted her grandpa back. This wish was what caused Whiskers to start transforming into her grandpa. But after a while, what she really ended up longing for was for a loving pair of parents. By giving blood and representation of her parents, a contract is made between her and Whiskers, the result being a new version of her parents that did love and dote on her. Her grandpa would disappear soon after, but it didn't matter because she wasn't really growing her grandpa, she was growing what he left behind. And now Adrian was truly happy. Growing My Grandpa impressed me for the way it told its story. I've never seen a game just outright give you everything from the get-go. It's all documented right there, and you just have to have the patience to find and read all the paperwork. And as you read those documents, there's that slow realization of what's going on. You learn Whiskers is dangerous. You learn it's trying to adapt to make it more appealing for it to hunt you. And it's not until the last paper is found that we learn we can partially control it. It's that feeling that I mentioned earlier. You know nothing good can come of Adrian interacting with this creature, but just enough details are pushed to the side or hidden that you soldier on a little longer to figure out exactly what's going on. I've mentioned it in my previous video on Yames, but what I admire most about his games is the way he forces the player to interact with the horror at hand. They have to make the decision to go back outside. They have to push the button to reveal more of the body. Growing My Grandpa leans further into that. You have to pick the uncomfortable option of feeding Whiskers the bad items like the batteries or the soap. You have to try and communicate with it in order to get hints on what you should be doing next. And you have to feed him the meat that the notes explicitly told you not to do. Yames wants you to explore the story he built, and I just find that admirable. I'll say it again. Growing My Grandpa has impressed me. It impressed me with its upfront approach to storytelling. It impressed me with its uncomfortable yet strangely calming soundtrack. It impressed me with its out there grotesque visuals, and I just have to say it. Yames, you've impressed me once again, and just thank you for this game.